Hi, everybody. This is Bill from Billboard Comics. I am here with another edition of Growing Up Comics. This is a recorded in the past, so I'll give it to you today. Um, the issue that made me a comic book collector. This is what I'm going to tell you about right now. Um, a little backstory. I don't know if you saw any other installments of this, but I grew up where comic books were more prevalent in the pop culture ephemera. If you were a kid growing up, basically comic books were part of your entertainment system. Um, More people were reading comic books back then than there are now. Kids have a lot more things to distract them, from Pokemon to video games to uh, app games on their phones, for instance. Phones were back there, but back when I was growing up, comic books were big. And I used to read them as part of, like, as most kids did back in the 70s and early 80s. Just have like a comic book as a way of, like, kind of like just uh, form of entertainment. Relatively cheap, usually. I think I started like about maybe 30 cents, 40 cents, um, back in the 70s. So, like, it was a way of your parents could get you something that will keep you out of their hair for hours on end. Um, and a lot of kids didn't actually take care of their books. Like, they read them until they fell apart and did away with them. Uh, I you, was one of those people. There's a lot of stuff that I remember reading when I was growing up that I don't know what happened to them. Books are probably disappeared. They probably uh, got thrown away, or got destroyed, or whatever. Um, but one of the things I used to focus on when I was a kid, because my family didn't really have a lot of money back in those days. I wanted to get the biggest bang for my buck when it came to buying comic books when I was a kid. You know what? And my idea is to go to team up books, like, say, Brave and the Bold, DC Comics Presents, Marvel Team Up, Marvel Toon One. That was one of my favorites growing up, because you could get one main character, Superman, Batman, Thing, Spider Man, and a guest star, a different character each month. I also gravitated towards team books because you had a whole bunch of characters. I remember as a kid, I usually kind of gravitated towards the more mismatch, kind of like patchwork quilt kind of teams. Then we go to the X Men, because the X Men were all kind of like bound together. Um, I think more like the Justice League, and in particular the Avengers. The Avengers, of course, were uh, made up of Marvel's most popular characters and a lot of their supporting characters. There's a mix of, like, people who had their own books, like Captain America, Thor, Iron Man, and also supporting characters were, at the time when I was reading it, Beast, Vision, Scarlet Witch, Wonder Man. Um, so you buy one of these books and you get like 7 to 10 characters, all different personalities, all different powers, all interacting with one another. Um, uh, so I, the Avengers became my favorite. Um, I will have another video on here telling you the actual three. I think it was a Marvel Multi Mags bag where I got 3 issues of the Avengers titles all at once, and that's what made me an Avengers fan. I'm not here to tell you why I'm an Avengers fan. That's for another video in the future. And if you want to hear that, subscribe and bookmark, and make sure you're notified. Hit the little bell so you're notified whenever I put a new one on. And when I get to that point, I will let you know. Um, but the whole thing about this is, like, every time I saw it, when I went out to the comic book store, there's no comic book stores, I'm sorry, the department stores or newsstands or whatever, if the Avengers were there, I'd pick them up. Um, what happened was that one day, it was 1982. I'm showing here, like, the on sale date was 10/12/1982, so it's probably somewhere around my birthday, around there. So I was probably um, 10 going on 11. Um, I remember it distinctly. I was in the Quarries. There's a five and dime kind of store in the Northeast, in the Wyoming Valley Mall in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. I think right now there's a Macy's inside it in the place of it, but at times McCrory's, and they had like it was kind of like a department store, like a comparison. If you don't know McCrory's, it's kind of like a Kmart, and if you don't know Kmart, well, uh, probably like a very small Walmart. Um, but they had like a kind of like clothes, little clothes, toys, um, appliances, stuff, small household appliances, stuff like that. But they also had a luncheonette, and they also had a like magazine section. They had a lot of like comic books in it. And when my parents used to go shopping there, again, like I said in an earlier video, for the supermarkets, they used to drop me off at places that had comic books in the store, so I could just read to my heart's content, and then they could go do their shopping and then come back and get me when they're ready to go, and I'd be safe and happy and whatever. I remember picking up this particular issue on one of those trips. Um, it is um, has like the comic book. Let me give you some information about the comic book, just a little background about the comic book itself. Its cover was done by artist by the name of Brett Breeding, typically known as an inker, but apparently he did the pencils and inks on this. Um, Written by Roger Stern. Um, Actually, it was his first writing on the title. Roger Stern is one of my favorite writers, particularly for his run on the Avengers. He had a rather lengthy run on the Avengers of several years, and he was responsible for the legendary storyline of the where the Masters of Evil took over and defeated temporarily the Avengers. They laid siege to the Avengers mansion, and uh, it was it is one of the best Avengers stories of all time, in my personal opinion. But I'm biased because I am of that generation. Um, but this was his actual first issue of his run on that. Did not realize that until just I did some research for this. I'm like, no wonder I got that. Like, would I be a fan of the Avengers or a comic book collector at all if I picked up, say, the first issue of the Bob Harris run, or even worse, the Chuck Austen run? Probably not. But I digress. The artwork was by Sal Buscema. Sal Buscema was, for me at that time, Mr. Marvel. His artwork appeared in pretty much all the major titles of today. He doesn't get a lot of respect now. I don't know why. His artwork is kind of like uh, slightly aping Jack Kirby, but I think it's more loose and fluid and more realistic. Um, but he's really good with the whole bombastic kind of like bodies flying off the panel kind of artwork. Um, but at the time, he did, I think, Spider-Man. At least he did like the Peter Parker Spectacular Spider-Man. He did the Hulk. He did a run on the Captain America. He did a run pretty much everywhere. And he's also kind of like a fill-in artist. This is what he did here. This was a fill-in issue that he did by himself. Um, Next issue was replaced by Al Milgrom. Um, no offense to Mr. Milgrom, a deep dive in quality. Um, but for this one, he was there, and he's one of my favorite artists from the era. However, this time he was inked by Brett Breeding, and I will show some examples of his work. Brett Breeding was kind of like, it seems like it didn't say anything like about him about being like doing breakdowns. He might have done breakdowns for it. Um, Sidebar here. There's between like penciling and breakdowns. Penciling, you do full pencils, you do all the backgrounds and stuff like this. There's not a lot of wiggle room for the inker to add his own stuff unless they're just being obnoxious and decides to erase all the backgrounds because he doesn't want to draw them in ink. Looking at you, Ghost of Vinnie Coletta. Um, Breakdowns are basically like loose sketches, pencils, where the inker has to do the lion's share of like actually doing the artwork. I don't know if this is the case with that, but Brett Breeding did the inks on this, and his inks were like just a little bit too overpowering. You could still see here and there that Sal Buscema's trademark artwork is coming through, but it's a little bit like like there's a little bit too slick, glossy sheen on it, and some of the characters, especially their faces, don't really look like Sal Buscema's faces. Some of you might think that the artwork in here is an improvement because they don't really like Sal Buscema, but that's up to you. Um, so, what drew me to this, first of all, is the cover. The cover features um, Captain Marvel, and I happened to like pick up the first appearance of Captain Marvel in Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 16, also written by Roger Stern, which means that her appearance here is like, hey, I got this new assignment, I created this new character, let's bring her on over, and we'll have her here, and she'll do the she'll be part of the team, and I get to write her all the time, and if it wasn't for that, who knows, we might not have had her character in WandaVision or the Marvels. Um, might just fall by the wayside and be forgotten about. Um, but I did get that first one, and one of the things when I was like a kid, at my early days of collecting, I was really drawn to, like, if a character is created while I was reading comic books, it seems to be, I took a proprietary interest in it because this is one of my characters. I don't mean that in the way that I wrote it, but it was created during my lifetime, and it's not stuff that had 20, 30 years of existence before I existed. It was stuff I could actually get in on the ground floor and follow them uh, throughout. That's why some of my favorite characters of all time are created during this time. Not just Captain Marvel, but Blue Devil and a whole bunch of other ones like Blue Devil, Deadpool. All those guys were created after I came into comic books, so I have a little special part of my heart for them. Um, but anyway, this is why I brought this in here, because I remember her from. It's a really good story about her getting her powers and trying to figure out like what's going on with it. But her like she becomes like within the span of 3 pages, she goes from being tested by the Avengers to becoming a member of the Avengers, um, which of course is like like if you think about realistic about comic book stories, and you really shouldn't do that much realism to it. Like it's like kind of you're going to a job interview, um, and you're going to like try to start off as being a secretary, and then within 3 days you become a member of the actual sales force. Doesn't usually happen that way, but you know, this is the rules of comic books, and Roger Stern wanted to write this character as a member of the Avengers, and that's what he did. Um, but that's what brought me into this one. There, as you can see by the cover, I'll probably put the cover up here again, and it doesn't really advertise a pulse pounding, heart racing, exciting display of story here. Um, the biggest thing on here is that Janet Van Dyne, the Wasp, has lunch with Reed Richards and Sue Storm from the Fantastic Four. And if you bought it looking for that, the whole thing lasts less than 2 pages. The actual lunch lasts maybe 2 panels. Most of it's done off screen. Spoiler warning for all you lunch collectors, comic books like stuff with lunch in it. But but nonetheless, I was drawn to the comic book as I read it. It basically going into a little bit of plot about it. It came out after a rather controversial period of time in the comic book. It was after Jim Shooter's run on the comic book, uh, especially after his detailing of the nervous breakdown that Hank Pym, Yellow Jacket, had at the time. Just make sure it's still on. Um, this is the notorious run where he actually backhanded Wasp and sent her flying, and it's that one. It's not a lot of the Avengers were really great stories, and Jim Shooter did one of the best ones with the Korvac saga. But between this, and he also had a hand in the whole um, Miss Marvel gets kidnapped in Limbo and is wooed by her son, and so she could get pregnant and give birth to him arc, which is repugnant. I might cover that in a future story or whatever, but nonetheless, I digress. Um, this was after this whole thing, and it seems like the main purpose of the issue was to start at least the process of rehabbing Hank Pym's character. Now, of course, I was a relative novice at this. Like he first appears in there as a guy, a prisoner in a cell, in the prison grays and stuff like this, um, who is just like sad and downtrodden. Um, but most of the issue is like retelling his story in comics, like doing highlights, his origin, like his time in the '60s, his fighting the Russians back in the early days of the '60s, his becoming Ant-Man, his becoming Giant Man, him becoming Goliath, him having another nervous breakdown and becoming Yellow Jacket, all the way up to like his attack, which brought him into there. He's in prison for stealing adamantium, which answers the question of like, because part of the last arc, the Jim Shooter arc, where he goes has nervous breakdown, he's in trouble with the Avengers because they're fighting an ultimate dimensional force, like of these fairy queen kind of person, and she gave up the fight. And as soon as she was done, I he wasn't paying attention or whatever. He blasted her in the back, um, and that's not what Avengers do. You know, somebody surrender, you let them surrender. You don't blast them in the back. So he's being put under a tribunal because of that. And his idea to get out of the trouble is to design a adamantium robot that um, is able to beat Thor, Captain America, and Iron Man, and all the rest of them. That he only he and only he alone could actually defeat. Um, there's a backfiring, and Jan has to save his fat from the fire, and nonetheless, but it was an adamantium robot. And I guess one of the questions is, at the time, adamantium was supposed to be a rare metal that a lot of people don't have access to. So part of the plot line is that he's been framed for stealing the adamantium that he used to make the robot, and that's why he's in prison right now. He's visited by a psychologist who we later find out that is paid by Tony Stark, and he does his whole back history to him as a way to introduce um, readers to the character and also to his predicament. Um, I at the point, like I said, I didn't know him at the point, but like once the origin came out, like I remember like from when I first started in Yellow Jacket being in there, and like yeah, we like this design. It's like the black and yellow. I'm a Steelers fan, so like black and yellow design was really nice. Um, and the whole twist is like saying like his thing is like the main point is that he said he did not steal the stuff. He's being framed for it by his enemy Egghead, but Egghead supposedly died earlier in the comic books. Um, this has been comic books, obviously. At the time, I was a relative novice, so like, oh wow, I guess that he's not coming back. Spoiler warning: last panel of the issue shows Egghead like gloating over the fact of what he did to Hank Pym. Um, I know I'm probably describing this horribly, but I apologize for that. But that's the basic plot of it. First 3 pages is like uh, Captain Marvel's being tested and introduced into the group. Then we have a little back and forth like drama between all the characters. The like 2 page lunch between Sue and Reed and Janet Van Dyne. Most of it's taking place of like Sue and Reed getting to the thing. And then the lion's share of the thing is the Hank Pym memory tour. Um, Again, it's like looking back at now, I see what it was. It's kind of like designed to rehab his character. Even now, the whole him smacking Wasp is a big bone of contention in comic history. Very controversial. Many people do not like it. Like so, I at the time did not know it because I wasn't reading it religiously then. Um, but it's a way to kind of like get past that and try to redeem the character, and I can see that now. Back then, I just thought it was like really interesting dramatic story. There's not a lot of action in it, except for the flashback where he's fighting people and like there's stuff going on like that. Um, but it's like for me, it sold the world of Marvel Comics and the Avengers perfectly. Various people with various different attitudes, various different levels of relationship. You know, Hawkeye's in it. He's being a hothead. He's all these new people coming in are ruining the system. Iron Man, Iron Man briefly dated Janet, so he's feel guilt about not only betraying his friend Hank, and even feeling if he should feel guilty because if Hank ruined it, why shouldn't he? And like, there's a whole bunch of dynamics with that. And then Thor is like thinking about leaving the team. A whole bunch of soap opera kind of melodrama. But it did show like okay, Cap and Iron Man and Thor are closer than like they are with other people. Like She Hulk is kind of like doesn't really have the same relationship with them as they have with each other. Um, it just shows that the characterization and like this is part of a world, and these are characters who like are not realistic because nobody is a thunder god. Nobody has a suit of armor that can actually fire bolts from their hand, the palm of their hand. Nobody has been unfrozen from a block of ice and could throw a shield that bounces off five items and comes back to them. But it makes them feel like real people with real problems and real discussion. And like Grand R is 10, so like it's a little heavy-handed with it. Looking back at it, I read it before I did this. A little heavy-handed looking back at it. But as a kid, I was like, this is so cool. And that's how I knew like I was going to be like a comic book collector for the rest of my life, because if a issue like this, which is basically like character work, gets me, you got me for life. Um, but I remember reading through it, and it's one of the things you know like like I said in a previous one, like if I read something in there and I really want to keep it, I would read it again. I would ask my parents to take it back. But I remember like walking out with it, holding my hand there after I purchased it, um, and I looked at it and I said to myself, I want to get every single copy of this from now on. Not only that, I also want to maybe you know like I don't know at the time if I wanted to be like a full fledged comic book collector and get more than just the Avengers, but I knew I wanted to follow this storyline through where it goes, and for as long as it goes, and you know see what happens. I So that I did. I kept on getting the new ones, getting next one, get next one. Um, I eventually decided, like I think like a couple issues later, decided okay, it's probably easier instead of me trying to find it like at the time. Like I think this was still before I found the local comic book shop that I went to. I decided to get an actual subscription, and you see a lot of stuff in cons now where you have like older books that are like subscription copies. They were folded in half because the mailman would put it in the um, mailbox, and it just didn't even care about it because it's just a comic book. They'd fold in half, and they like and just put it in like the mailbox so it just fit in there, so it wasn't hanging out or doing anything like that. And you know, luckily I lived in a trailer park that had a separate building for its mailbox, and each mailbox was then big enough to lay flat. And luckily, like when I was a kid, I used to spend summers just hanging around. I used to ride my bike over and hang out with the mailman. That's that's how geeky I am. You don't have people like having like hanging out with like the local store owner or like a neighbor. I was hanging out with a mailman. But you know what? That reaped benefits because the guy knew I was collecting comic books, and I wanted my comic books to be in good condition, and he was really great about making sure that it stayed flat in there. So thank you, Stanley. I don't remember what your last name is, but you're probably not even with us anymore. But thank you for doing that. I really do appreciate that. But anyhow, like I got a subscription to that, and then eventually, like okay, I started picking up other stuff like when I was out. Like okay, I got Avengers taken care of, so like maybe I'll give Captain America a shot. Maybe I'll do Iron Man. And back then, of course, comic books were much cheaper than they are now. So I like had I think a $5 allowance, which is massive back then. But it was enough for me to go like I think it was $5 a week. Um, okay, I could take a chance on Power Man and Iron Fist. I could chance on the New Mutants. it's a New Mutant book. I could take care of that. Um, I could also pick up the X-Men, which was the another book I put on subscription. I got 3 subscriptions from Marvel when I was a kid: the Avengers, X-Men, and Marvel Team Up. Delivered directly to your door. It was pretty cool. I might do another video on how it was to get a subscription from them back then in the future, but for the purposes I'm digressing from that. But if it wasn't for that book and how much it spoke to me and said to me, it was it, it was setting up like plot lines that I would have to like, even like I don't even realize this. There's a scene where they're loading supervillains, the Wizard and Plant Man, into a plane, a helicopter to take to another prison. And at the time, I didn't think anything of it. But now looking back at it and reading the entire run, in future issues, the Avengers go up against the Wizard and Plant Man. So Stern was setting the stage to introduce them in a later issue. Um, so I dig that now. So I might have to do a whole deep dive and reread all those if I could find time. But it was just like, it's just such a joyful experience reading the book that I decided I want to do this from now. And thank you, Mr. Stern. If it wasn't for you, I probably wouldn't be here making this video. I probably wouldn't be so excited about um, becoming a comic collector and passing it along. Um, and I think this is a good time to end this now. Been going for about a half hour. Cut out a little bit. What was your first experience with collecting comic books? What comic book made you a collector? Which um, made you decide, listen, I love this so much, I want to get all these. I want to get these from now on. Did you stumble into it? Did you have a eureka moment like I did? Or did you just kind of like, okay, well, all of a sudden, like I have all these comic books around here, I might as well keep on going with it. Let me know in the comments. Let's have a conversation going on this, if you feel up to it. Um, like, tell me your thoughts. Tell me what was your comic book what was your favorite comic book you read when you started collecting that made you want to collect more of them? Just let me know. And if you want further installments of this series, um, please just check the subscribe button, hit the little bell, and and if you think somebody might like to hear this, share it with them. Everything helps try to build this channel up to where I would like it to be, and I greatly appreciate it. So thank you very much for listening, and um, I wish you the best. And until next time, keep collecting.